Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's performance will include impressionists, crazed hockey mascots, and terribly traumatic 20th century German parenting advice. All this and more as we discuss babies on Created Things. Goo goo gaga, and welcome to Created Things, a podcast of Catholic creatives hosted by two fathers of certain types and also the sworn enemies of singer-songwriting superstar Shawn Mendes. With me is my co-host, burgeoning medievalist and Catholic priest, Father Gabriel Toretta, and I am artist and psychotherapist, Jacob Flores Popchek. Father Gabriel, you don't know why I just introduced the podcast that way, because I wanted you to have a chance to live react. Do you have any guesses as to why you and I are the sworn enemies of singer-songwriter Shawn Mendes?
Is it okay if I admit that I have no idea who singer-songwriter Shawn Mendes is?
It actually makes it better.
Okay.
It makes
so
it
this
better.
is there is a singer-songwriter named Shawn Mendes. So
do you
step
know
one.
Do you know who Camila Cabello is?
I know who Camilla Harris is.
Okay, that's not the same thing. Do you know who Taylor Swift is?
Yes, I know that because I am a person who does not live under rocks.
Taylor Swift's best friend is like Latin pop superstar Camila Cabello.
Okay.
Her ex-boyfriend is singer-songwriting superstar Shawn Mendes.
Aha.
Literally last night of the time of this recording, Shawn Mendes' legal team copyright struck our podcast.
Oh, wait a second. We've hit the big time so big that we've already been sued.
Yeah, we'll copyright stricken by YouTube, because anyone who's listened to our podcast obviously knows that our little intro mimics what you might hear if you were to go to a Broadway show or a symphony where someone comes on and reads kind of the announcements over the symphonic warm-up. And so I have royalty-free symphonic warm-up music, and apparently either his legal team, it was sent on behalf of his legal team, but it was more likely the YouTube algorithm, what giveth and taketh away, decided that our royalty-free symphonic interlude music sounds too much like some royalty-free symphonic interlude music he used on one of his songs.
Oh my gosh.
So now,
this is amazing.
Me and my producer Kyle have to go through the bullshit bureaucratic rigmarole, and honestly, do credit to him, almost entirely Kyle has to do this, of proving that we did not rip off Shawn Mendes with this podcast.
That's incredible. Well, I did. I woke up this morning and I said, if there is such a creature as singer-songwriter Shawn Mendes, I would desire to steal everything he's ever done and give him no credit, because that is just the kind of person that I am.
In fairness, it is sort of the Grinchy person that you are, where you just stand on your mountain and be like, Shawn Mendes, I loathe you.
Actually, that's entirely reasonable. I see all of these things. I see willingness to do all of these things. Yes.
So anyway, suffice it to say, Shawn Mendes and I are now in a feud.
Okay, well, yeah, that's tough. It's tough, but
we have hardcore beef on Twitter. I don't have a Twitter account, but if I had one, we would have beef there.
Yeah. Well,
and the only way
the potential of beef on Twitter, which is important.
Right. Yeah, we have beef in potentiality, as the church would say. And the only way to settle this is to challenge him to a fight at WrestleMania, a la Logan Paul.
Yeah, respect.
So expect me to get my ass kicked by Shawn Mendes sometime next year. And tweet, at Shawn Mendes on Twitter to tell him he's canceled and that he's anti-Catholic. He must hate Catholics, he must hate artists.
All the
above.
Podcast. Yeah.
Don't actually do that. Please don't actually do that. But it'd be funny if you did, but don't.
Oh.
So that's my little legal statement. How does it feel to be part of the big time now, though?
Yeah,
Padre?
well, it's pretty
pissing off Hollywood elites.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I ran a blog one time that sometime after I stopped running it, received a whole bunch of kind of cease and desist letters about
wait, what?
Well, it was one of these things where I used a bunch of images that were you write an article and then you put a header image, right? I used a bunch of images that were copyright free at the time that I was using them. But then they were bought by one of these like squatter companies, that just like buys up like rights to photographs.
Yeah.
So like apparently some swine company like went through and bought up like a bunch of photographs of like Chesterton, for instance, the writer G.K. Chesterton.
For God's sake.
So like you can't. Anyway, so we got all these like cease and desist letters, like although this image has been in use on this blog for like 6 years, and at the time that you posted it, it was not under copyright. It has now become under copyright, and so you must cease and desist.
Well, and see, that's basically what happened here too, because we didn't get copyright stricken, I guess is the proper tense, for any of the other episodes other than our last one, which was Lily's, which makes me think that maybe that sound has like left the public domain in the time that we've been using it. But there are these companies that like this is a huge problem on YouTube last year, where all these like react channels, and you and I have joked about how weird it is. There's a whole genre of people just like reacting to other things, then we react to them reacting, and it's just meta and meta and meta. But they were all sued, and they all lost all of like their channels were shut down. They were all demonetized. Like videos were just deleted because there were a couple of these companies that were just going through and buying like viral video clips. So they would just search out like funny videos of cats or people falling down, and they would offer the person who filmed the video and posted it originally like $500. And then they would sue larger YouTube accounts for like thousands and thousands of dollars to get their accounts back.
That's incredible.
It's a whole business model.
Yeah.
Really predatory shit happening out there. It's crazy. People don't know. Like they think YouTube is this like beautiful place for people to, marketplace of ideas and all that. And it's just. I
don't think anyone has thought that YouTube is a beautiful place since like 2005.
Well, I don't know. I'm homeschooled, so I still live in 2005
Fair.
In my head somewhere. I'm still permanently trapped in 2005. As a result of my upbringing. But I don't know. I mean, Twitter's toxic, but I still feel like people think of YouTube as like a cool place. Am I wrong about that? Am I like late to the party on this?
I don't know. I mean, like I go on YouTube and like this will not surprise you at all. Like the only sort of like recommended videos that I ever see are like, see this other Bach recording, and like, they like know that I like Bach, and they know that I like the Mountain Goats, and that's pretty much all they've been able to figure out. And
if the Mountain Goats ever cover Bach, your algorithm's just going to explode.
Yeah, exactly right.
I do send you so many like little YouTube videos and dumb TikToks, and I hope that I'm slowly destroying your algorithm.
It's gonna
Bach, Mountain Goats, and then like Ricky Berwick reacting to anime.
Yeah, it's gonna take a lot.
That's what's happening.
It's gonna take a lot. I don't want to admit how many times I've seen certain Mountain Goat videos on the YouTubes, but it's a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's an uphill battle, but it's one I am willing to fight. Speaking of fighting good fights, I know how you like artificial and terrible transitions.
Very smooth and natural transitions, you mean? Yeah, they're very important.
Yeah, okay. So I have been fighting a good fight recently. A very good fight, a very cute fight. And that is the fight of being a new parent. Shortly before our last episode, which is why, for those with eagle ears, knew that it was fueled with manic energy. My wife and I had our first child.
Baby!
And I would like to welcome him as a little guest to our podcast right now. My wife is sitting off camera, being very helpful. Dressed in appropriate branded swag. Everyone, please meet Morgan Davey.
Oh my god!
An official Catholic Creatives baby.
Look at him!
And my personal favorite created thing. So I'm going to let him hang out with us for a little while.
This is so great.
He likes nestling in Daddy's arm, and he likes singing and dancing. That's one of his favorite things. And I got a little bottle here in case he gets fussed. You want a bottle, little buddy? We can have a little bottle. You want this bottle? Maybe, sort of, kind of. Yeah, isn't that nice? Isn't that nice?
This is adorable. This is for the record my first time seeing the child.
Oh my god, is it actually? Also, don't call it the child. It makes you sound like a Star Wars film.
Well, I was actually channeling that energy fairly intentionally. Yes. So
yeah. Who is it that plays that guy again?
Who? What?
The dystopian director that we always joke about. What's his name again? The German
Werner Herzog.
Werner Herzog. Yes. Well, he's the one in Mandalorian who says, I want
I
to see the
just want
child.
to see the child. Yes.
I want to see the child.
Oh my gosh.
Which has Herod energy. Can we be really Catholic and just say that the Mandalorian has real sort of Herod energy?
That's probably true. I can say that I have only watched The Mandalorian in German, as one does, and the best thing about that is that Werner Herzog does his own German dubbing.
Oh, God bless him. That's wonderful.
Which is amazing, actually. Like it's really, really fantastic.
Why is my son squeaking so loud on this bottle? So I don't know. Did I mention his name? This is Morgan Davey, Flores Popcheck. He is the best. He is my favorite. He sleeps pretty good, and then he's grumpy all day, which in that sense is exactly like me.
Yeah, I was gonna say that sounds pretty familiar, actually.
Yeah. He's got my eyes and virtually all of his mother's other features, which thank God. God is good and didn't curse another person to have my face and body. So you were doing pretty good. And because of this, right at the beginning of this podcast, we had just conceived Morgan when we Jess and I had we started this podcast, right? You dang. And I. And so right from the very beginning, this was one of the episodes that we wanted to do because, we sort of set out with this idea to do an arts podcast. And I think sometimes people think that this is a Catholic podcast, and it is not. It is an arts podcast that happens to have two really Catholic dudes on it. Buddy. How's it going, my friend? And so, right from the very beginning, we sort of conceptualized that, hey, babies are really the ultimate created thing. Right? They are this art form. And so I don't know if anyone listening, maybe you've only listened to the audio version. I know. We only listened to the audio version. And so maybe they haven't seen like the theme song that we put together, but the video version of the theme song, like right away, we sort of have like photos represented, and we have painting represented, and we have dance and collage represented. But at the apex, I have a little clip of you consecrating the Blessed Sacrament as sort of this beautiful example of created things, and we have an ultrasound of a little baby, not Morgan. It's a royalty free. Speaking of royalty free stuff, it's a Shutterstock ultrasound.
I had also assumed that was in fact your actual child, but it's not. Because
we didn't get video. That was like extra money.
Oh yeah,
we just got 3D photos. It's highway robbery.
Yeah.
Like anything, but yeah, so like right away, you and I both very explicitly wanted to make sure that this podcast about the arts touched on art forms that people don't necessarily consider art. And when he finally came along, and you came along a couple weeks ago, and it was very hard for you, I know, we had this idea to sort of do, and I'm just kind of letting people in on the process here. We had this idea to do kind of a 2-part episode, and one was just going to be on babies themselves. And then that's today. And then our next episode next week, tune in. Buddy, I know. Our next episode next week is going to be on fatherhood, right? Hey, Jess, you want to help me out with this little guy? I'm sorry. You can come back later if you're not upset again, okay? Okay. I love you. Say goodbye to everybody. Bye, Morgan. Bye. Thank you so much, darling. I appreciate that. I apologize. My beautiful wife, everyone. Here's the bottle. See, this podcast is real, man. This is really shit. This podcast is so real. There we go. So anyway, yeah, today's babies. Next week is fatherhood. And you had like a really cool idea. Maybe you can talk people through this, but to sort of break these topics up, because for me, they're all very combined. What is baby, if not the sort of the painting to fatherhood, of the artist of fatherhood? That analogy didn't make any sense, but I think you know what I mean. But you made the good point of like, maybe we should just talk through like our own artistic experience of things that have inspired or impacted or informed our idea of babies as an art form, and like how this idea has built and the influences on us there. And I don't know, would you mind elaborating on that? Because I thought that was a really cool idea for an episode, and I'm excited for the conversation. So I want everybody to be in the same loop with us.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because the thing is, like, you think, all right, well, let's talk about babies. Well, everyone who's ever had a baby loves babies and thinks just like, oh, babies. And then like most people, I think, who even don't have a baby themselves, think to themselves most of the time, like, oh, babies, it's adorable. So rather than just having kind of an hour of like, oh, babies, although, that's fun. I thought like, what if we actually reflected together on like, created things that can like help us, that have helped us sort of understand babies, or that that when I think about like babies in the abstract or whatever, these kinds of things help me to sort of think through that, like what this is in the human experience, that our lives begin this way, and that like we hand on life in this way, all of these things. So I just thought like that would be a really fruitful thing. I mean, you've been talking at the beginning that like, in a sense, the baby, a baby himself is like the perfect created thing, which makes sense. And that's why we wanted to call this podcast like Created Things, and not just like, them arts or something like that.
Artsy fartsy fun time.
Artsy fartsy fun time.
Jake and Father G.
Although I would have also liked to call it an art, just an art. But
just one single
art. It's one at a time.
We had a lot of bad ideas for podcast names at the beginning. We'll do an episode on that at some point. I had a paper just full of terrible ideas I thought of, and I just rattled them off to Father Gabriel in my kitchen. He was like, that one. I was like, okay.
Yeah, this was by the way, but purely passive on my part. It's like, well, I didn't do any thinking at all, so I hate all those, but I like that one, which is kind
it's pretty much our relationship.
That is actually literally our relationship. That's also my relationship with the arts, and it's all great. So yeah, I think it's my sacred trust. So but yeah, like we talk a lot about, we reference a lot this beautiful letter that John Paul II wrote to artists, and in it he presents, he says like each individual person has like as his life is his primary artwork, and that within that, like the family and the handing on of life is this primary work of beauty that is given to a husband and a wife, and like, so why not think about children, babies in particular, as a creative thing, and then think about them with the arts, with other creative things that have helped us to understand them.
Well, and this is, you're right to cite, of course, this letter from Pope St. John Paul II, but it's come up in many other ways, this idea. I mean, in our Van Gogh episode where we, had that conversation with the folks from Salt Project, like, that great quote from Vincent van Gogh where he's talking about that Christ was the ultimate artist, and he shunned paint and clay for working in flesh, right? And this is like a privilege that parents, whether we're biological parents or adoptive parents or foster parents, we get to do that. We get to share in that rarest and most special and most high stakes art form, and in a broader sense, I think that's really the spirit of the whole podcast, right? Where we really want to deconstruct a little bit the idea of like what art is and like what the arts are, and very much show that like art is for everyone, and everyone can be, and in fact is, and needs to embrace the fact that they are an artist. And I've been really privileged, in my counseling practice to talk to a number of people, mainly women, but a few men who have worked as artists and in the professional kind of classical sense, and then have had to, in some sense, sacrifice their continued artistic and professional development in order to better raise their children. And I have often talked with them about how that was not a sacrificing of their art at all, that was merely a shifting of medium, and in fact shifting from an inferior medium, whether they were sculptors or painters or dancers or filmmakers in some cases, to a superior medium, the medium of designing and building and creating their kids. And that's always been a very healing thing for the people I've gotten to talk to about that. And frankly, it's been a healing thing for me as a struggling artist to be considering my kid that way. So yeah, I'm just really excited to get into some of these things. Once you gave that as sort of a prompt for the episode, I honestly then just kind of went crazy with the prompt, because I'm like, yeah, what? I was like deconstructing myself. I'm like, what has built up my personal idea of what a baby is, and fuels even my my psychotherapeutic advice, right? Because obviously when someone comes to me for like parenting advice, they're going to have a very different idea even of what a baby is than I do. And that's
Right.
part of what is maybe undermining their relationship with their kid, and so on and so forth. So I just think we're going to, I don't know. I have no idea necessarily. I have no idea at all what you're going to say. And I don't even quite know yet what I'm going to say, but I'm just really excited for the conversation. Cause I mean, as I said, we've been waiting on this since the very first episode, but we knew eventually my little guy was going to come up.
That's great. That's great. I don't know. Why don't you launch us into one? I feel like as the new father, you should have the right to launch into the first one.
Yeah, I'm trying to decide where to start. Because obviously, you know, we talk about Christian art a lot in this podcast, and the idea of, you know, the infant and mother, right? The Madonna and child is just so hyper proliferated throughout the consciousness of anyone who's raised a Catholic at all, right? I mean, it's like the cross and this woman holding the baby, and you like very early on, I think you're going to inherit some idea that there's a sacredness about babies just as by osmosis, just by being around that kind of a thing. That could be a really fun place to start, but I might start this way. So I don't know that there was any world in which I wasn't going to be part of the arts because, so, you know, as I joked at the beginning of this episode, I was homeschooled, and my parents weren't these like weird people, no offense, but these weird people who were very obsessed with like making me read the classics. But my mom, for some reason that I honestly have never discussed with her, so I'm not sure why, but she was really into me knowing the arts well. And specifically like painters well, and like letting me experience culture from a very early age. When I was seeing ballets and musicals when I was like a very little kid, like way younger than you're supposed to bring children to these kinds of things, lest they disrupt the performance. And I loved them, and I was enraptured, and I would sit for hours in museums sketching what I saw in front of me. We would just like spend hours in art galleries at the, you know, mainly in Pittsburgh, and I would just draw and copy these great works of art that were sitting there in front of me. But there was this one game, and I don't remember what it was called, but I'm sure it's easily Googleable, that it was essentially Go Fish. But you would buy these packs of Go Fish cards, and instead of, you know, the suit that you would find on a normal set of cards, it would be all of the major paintings by one artist.
Oh, interesting. Okay, cool.
And you would buy it in sets like the great Renaissance artists or the Impressionists or whatever. And so you'd play a round of Impressionists, and you would say like, do you have any Van Goghs, or do you have any like, and you would try to complete your set of that artist's work.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Cool.
And so that by the time I visited my uncle, who was studying to be a priest in Chicago, where you are now, and we went to the Chicago Museum of Art, I knew at like 9-10 years old every painting in there, and he was so excited to kind of walk me around and try and be like, oh, do you know who did this painting? And I would always be, yes, of course I know, that's this one. And he was like shook by this. He couldn't believe there was this little kid who could do this. And so I had this and I loved that game. Like, this is not one of those things that I'm saying, oh, that was very serious that my mom did this and she shouldn't have done this. No, it's great. I hyper recommend it. It was a lot of fun, and it gave me a lot of appreciation for various types of art. And this is all a very long-winded way to avenue into, in the Impressionist series of these cards, one of the sets you could collect was Mary Cassatt.
Oh, sure.
Now, Mary Cassatt is sort of this really badass feminist artist chick who does not get nearly enough credit alongside people like Frida Kahlo in the popular imagination, but was the one woman slumming it with the boys during the French Impressionist movement. She held her own. She was a bad bitch. And among all these like very snarky, terrible men with debilitating mental health conditions trying to start an arts movement, she was just the groovy chick who moved out there and like held her own. And she was actually, despite being part of this French arts movement, was from Pittsburgh. originally.
Right.
That's where she comes from. The Three Rivers Stadium for the Steelers is built over where her house was. So,
it's been enshrined.
Everywhere.
This is how
That's
Pittsburgh shows its love. Is it builds a Steelers stadium over your house?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. God, I never thought of it that way, but that is really a Catholic approach to it, isn't it? And because of that, a lot of Mary Cassatt's paintings, which would normally end up in these great, gigantic museums around the world, did end up actually finding their way into the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh. And so both by actually getting to physically see them and also by way of these cards, I had a very early introduction to the art of Mary Cassatt. And if you're familiar with her work at all, her major theme was motherhood. And she would paint these really gorgeous, beautifully lit, vivid, splotchy depictions of messy motherhood. And, these babies with fruit juice all over them and, sitting in a field with an exhausted woman. And they were just so luscious and beautiful. And I think that was probably my first, even honestly, before I was aware of sort of the mother and child theme within Catholicism as meaning anything larger than just Mary and Jesus specifically, I was aware of Mary Cassatt and the way that she made babies truly a work of art and really a beautiful thing, and not in a stylized sort of, oh, look how cute the baby is, but in a really messy, look how this kid is squished up on a blue couch with their cheeks all, over the place and covered in orange. And, I think it had a fundamental influence on me, her work. And in general, I think it's interesting, and I'll leave off on this and hand you the baton, but I think it's interesting because, the whole Impressionist movement, obviously painting with light and things like this, but was really a response to, let's sort of try to find beauty in the commonplace. And so, Edgar Degas is painting what he calls his beautiful monkeys, which are like sort of the anorexic ballet dancers of the time. And there are people painting like the prostitute they're dating, and there are people painting farmers, or, as we talked about in our Van Gogh episode, people painting potato peelers and things like this. And Cassatt's approach to this through her own femininity was really looking at babies. And I think that idea of the sort of height of the beauty of the commonplace being a child is a really good starting point for understanding what is so sacred and so special about babies as both a created thing in the divine sense and also in the artistic sense too.
Yeah.
So that's my sermon. I'll get off my soapbox.
No, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. I know. I love, she has an image of, I think she has several that are kind of like this, but there's one particular one of a mother giving her daughter a bath. It's I think probably the first piece of hers that I ever knew.
It's like a little tub on the floor.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And it's just this, you're right. Her stuff is very tender, very expressive. But for her, she didn't really seem like she had to get to the nitty gritty. It didn't have to be like bad people doing bad things, I was just at the Art Institute a couple of days ago and saw again that painting, which I have just absolutely never been able to figure out, which is Toulouse-Lautrec's, was it at the House of the Moulin Rouge or something? It's
or Dance at the Bougival.
Yeah, is it with a big weird green face on the right hand side? It's so It's so confusing. I've never been able to figure out that.
So
painting.
I actually love Toulouse-Lautrec, and we could do a whole episode on him.
Oh, that would be fun because he kind of
how tormented he was and all these kinds
very
of
tormented. That part's clear, but some of these paintings, it's just like, well, we have to go down into the depths, and that's where the real is, And
what's funny about Toulouse-Lautrec is he was the exact opposite of that guy. I will just say this, a lot of artists will do that. We'll do this thing you're talking about where let's make it gritty. Let's make it and especially as a medievalist, I'm sure this pisses you off because every time anybody wants to depict the Middle Ages realistically, it's just in more and more muted shades of brown.
Right.
But that was not Toulouse-Lautrec at all. He was widely considered a sellout by other impressionists. He was sort of like, he was constantly doing commercial art. He had no desire to be gritty. It's just that that's literally the world he lived in.
That's incredible.
So
He's actually just painting documentaries, basically.
Right, yeah, and it's like he didn't have to go seek out the darkness. He just lived there and painted what he saw.
I just painted my house.
And it's really, exactly, he literally like in Dance of the Book of All, that's his girlfriend that he's painting.
Yeah.
So it's like rough. It's rough.
It's rough when you Toulouse-Lautrec,
anyway,
you know?
That's a side note, but you're making a larger point about people delving into grittiness.
Yeah, and like for Mary Cassatt, like, she just doesn't, that's just not how she does it. You know, she just chooses to sort of like, she has this sort of very frank and open view where she just wants to see things, sort of on their own terms. And because she paints motherhood and childhood so much, it's funny, there's like a risk that it would become, sentimental. And I think every now and then, sure. I mean, you can avoid it 100% of the time, but,
right. I mean, especially when you're a parent, right?
Yeah,
like
but in contrast to like
the currency,
Renoir, for instance, who, of course, you know, in addition to all of his great masterpieces, also paints these like really bizarrely kind of like, sort of like, cutesy little girl paintings, you know.
I've never been a Renoir guy.
Who's
you know this about me?
What was like back like 5 or 10 years ago? There was that like 6-year-old who was being exploited by her mother for like beauty contests, and she had like a TV show.
Oh God, are you talking
Honey Boo Boo?
Oh God, I thought you were talking about Jean-Benet Ramsey at first.
No,
but no,
that's too dark. That's too dark. No, we're sticking in the Mary Cassatt world, and we're gonna go with Honey Boo Boo.
You mean our babies episode isn't gonna abruptly pivot into excessively dark jokes about the Jean-Benet Ramsey case?
That's so far so good. But yeah, no.
Okay, Honey Boo Boo. So
yeah.
you're gonna be the hot take guy who compares
Renoir to Honey Boo Boo. Yeah.
Yeah.
He just like has a set of paintings where he's like, what if I just painted Honey Boo Boo? And it would be amazing. And everyone was like, yeah, I guess, okay, I'll put that in the Renaissance, in the Impressionist section of my museum, and I guess we'll be happy that we have Renoir, so it's cool. But anyway, yeah. So that's to say, I really love Cassatt. I'm really glad you brought her up, because I think I hadn't really thought about her, but you're right. Like she also exercised an important sort of influence on my own experience, just because of having known some of her works from so early on, and just that like unaffected kind of innocence, I think, of her stuff, which is very beautiful.
How did you become aware of her stuff early on? It's interesting to hear you say that.
Well, it was because of a totally different art-based board game, obviously, which apparently is like literally the only way that you can get your children to know about art, I guess, at least in the 20th century. Yes, there was this art board game called Masterpiece.
Oh, I think I've heard of it.
It was produced in I've done a little bit of looking into this because I was obsessed with this game as a child. There were like a handful of, there were maybe like 3 or 4 different printings. I think it was first printed in the 70s, and then there was a one later, like maybe in the 80s. But it's funny you should mention about like walking into the Art Institute of Chicago and being like, oh, I know all this stuff, because like, bro, like when I first moved to Chicago, my friend who moved me in, the first thing we did was after I moved in my stuff, we like went to the Art Institute, and it was a surreal experience because I like literally knew all of the most important paintings in the collection, and I was like, why?
It's such a cool feeling.
Do I know?
I can't believe we both have this experience.
Yeah, why do I know all of these specific paintings? Not just like, oh, these painters or this and that. No, but like these specific paintings. Well, it's because the print run of Masterpiece that we played like all the time as children, was entirely based on paintings from the Art Institute of Chicago. And it was an art auction game, so you sort of kept you put it doesn't matter the mechanics of the game.
There's sort of a pseudo monopoly element to it.
Kind of, yeah. And it was a genuinely well designed game, and it was all based on these paintings from the Art Institute, and this one Mary Cassatt with a bathing was in there.
We should mention at this point that this podcast is sponsored by Masterpiece the board game. Masterpiece the board game. No, I'm kidding. I wish we were sponsored by. That's so funny though that we would have such parallel. I had no idea that about you.
Yeah.
Isn't that so crazy though that if you had played a different board game as a kid, like Candyland, you'd be a priest getting a doctorate in medieval confectionery instead of medieval ideas of art.
Maybe that'd be how it worked. Too bad when I tried to play Candyland as a kid, it just never really held my attention.
Yeah, never sank into the same level that the great masters did for some reason.
I know. In fact, even when I was just there, I was standing with a friend in front of this great Rembrandt portrait. I realize Rembrandt has like hundreds of great portraits, but this is one of them. And I grabbed my friend and like stopped. I'm like, look at this. And he's like, oh yeah, this is really great. It's like, yes. I cannot explain that the reason that I love this almost beyond all of Rembrandt's other portraits is because I've been looking at it since I was like 5 years old. But I love it. It's amazing.
I think in an episode about babies, dude, I think it's a great case to be made for exposing your kids to art early. And not in like a gross, you must learn the masters sort of a way, but like, guess what? You're a stay-at-home mom or dad with your kid and you're looking for something to do with your kid. Yeah, you could go to the playground again. Or if you live in the myriad of states where 9/10 of the year are freezing ass cold, you could go to your local art museum and nobody's going to care.
True.
No one's going to care. The security, don't let your kid go rub their hands all over the painting. But short of that, just exposing your kids to art early, if that becomes the major theme of this episode, I will be very happy with that. I will say one more thing on Mary Cassatt, though, or Mary Cassatt, that I really love, and it's especially relevant now, being a psychotherapist and giving people parenting advice. I'm privy to, and thank God it's dying a little bit now, but this really annoying kind of online culture war between self-proclaimed bad moms and bad moms proclaimed cupcake mommies.
Okay, I don't know what that means, but that's insane.
Right. Well, basically it's this, and you'll be familiar with the phenomenon. It's moms who are frustrated by the sentimentality proclaimed on social media about motherhood, who then go kind of 100 million degrees in the other direction and say, we're going to really kind of glory in the grittiness of real motherhood and authentic motherhood. And there's, I think, as a psychotherapist, I would say, in my personal opinion, without any judgment to anybody, I think there are real problems with both sides of this. Obviously, anytime we fetishize and over sentimentalize something, it has real world damaging effects. And especially in an Instagram era, that's true. And one of those damaging effects is just missing out on a lot of what makes something deep and worthwhile, which we can talk more about. But I also think that like the bad moms culture, again, self-proclaimed, is always ties in a little bit with alcoholism and this idea of like, I'm just gonna drink my wine at 3:00 because that's how mommy gets through it, and like I'm gonna sew wine puns onto pillows and things like this. And what I love about, to get back to the subject here, what I love about Cassatt is that she sort of cuts through that totally false and unnecessary dichotomy by painting very real shit, but it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's not, hey, let's get gritty and real. It's also not, hi mommies, like and subscribe. It's, hey, the gritty realness is actually transcendently beautiful.
Yeah.
And that I really, I don't know. And the more I think about it, the more I realize, wow, that has a huge effect on me as a person and me as a parent now, even, just a couple weeks in.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really beautiful. I'm glad you put it, you emphasize it, because that's what I was trying to say, but you said it exactly right. That that there is something false that when we say like, let's get real, that we jump to like, let's get gritty reboot, where, yeah.
Kyle, our producer, could you just put up a picture of Philadelphia Flyers mascot Gritty right here?
Gritty.
Just Gritty, because that's who we're talking about.
We are talking about the Gritty reboot.
Get Gritty. Yeah.
This is incredible. Oh my gosh, I have so many thoughts about Gritty, but I won't say them. Yeah, I just know I think you're right that like that children are this especially like in their baby mode are this really powerful exemplar of like, yeah, this is what real life is. It is in fact randomly covered in feces. The discovery of the ways in which babies can poop up the back of their neck is just it was like discovering that babies have a superpower, the first time,
like an evil superpower.
Well, not all superpowers are good, yeah,
right, yeah,
yeah. The first time that like I forget if it was one of my nieces or nephews or whether it was a baby of a friend, where the first time that they said that they said, oh no, oh it's in her hair, and I said,
oh,
how is
God.
that possible? Oh no. So there is that.
I mean, just real estate wise, there's a lot less distance to travel between anus and head on a baby than for you.
There is, but still there's drama there. There's drama
there's drama in that real estate
that is worth recognizing and appreciating on its own, and let's not sell it short, okay?
It's a small neighborhood, but a lot happens.
Yes, exactly.
I will say, as a total sidebar to that, and I think there's something to be connected to the more Catholic elements of this podcast here. But like, I don't know if it's possible to understand the idea of God as Father more than when you get excited about poop as a parent.
Okay, I could see
that. Like, in the first couple days after your child is born, there's this very important transition that has to happen in the like texture and color and consistency of their fecal matter, right? And I'm waiting for this to happen to make sure he's okay. Like I'm waiting for the second coming of Christ. Like I'm so excited when his shit goes yellow and has weird little poppy seeds in it. And it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that I'm excited about this, but I'm meditating simultaneously on the fact that God the Father is looking at our shit the same way and delighting in that. And you can say that and you can intellectualize that. And I think a lot of people do, but until you yourself are sitting there excited about poop, someone else's poop, you cannot understand God the Father to that same level. You just can't.
Yeah, for a podcast with from two men, it is important to specify we're being excited about other people's poop because men do tend to have like a little bit too much of an interest in their own poop when it's particularly impressive, etc. So yes, I think you're exactly right.
Oh, there's a lot here, man. There's impressionists. There's there's Gritty.
It's Gritty.
There's poop. And
let
that's babies.
Let me throw another thing at you. So
please don't let it be poop. Don't throw poop.
I am not a monkey. Okay, I'm not a monkey. I do not throw feces except for when I do.
One of Degas' ugly monkeys.
Ugly monkeys, exactly. So I am a big fan of the writer G.K. Chesterton. I mentioned him earlier. Don't apparently use many of his obviously out of copyright photographs because they may or may not have been purchased by a parasitic internet company. But but he's just this amazing author who has this real look into a really, really, really deep look into the heart of the world. In fact, he wrote a really beautiful little piece called "In Defense of Babies."
Oh, how have I not read this?
Yeah, well, it's a little essay. His essays are not quite as widely known now. He was famous in his own day as an essayist, like a character in George Orwell's Burmese Days is like in Burma reading an essay in a newspaper by G.K. Chesterton, and Orwell if he decides to reference that. That's a really roundabout reference, but it's true. So he was very famous in his own day as an essayist and a newspaper writer, but he's really famous now as a novelist, especially. And then he's written a couple of really famous books of theology, reflection on the world kind of stuff. But he wrote all of these essays, many of which are really amazing. And In Defense of Babies has this really great both treatment of babies as such, and then also kind of in his classic way, he uses this reflection on babies to kind of present his own basic thesis about the world, which will be recognizable almost instantaneously. So I'm just going to read this. This is a little paragraph, so I'm just going to read it. The most the most unfathomable schools and sages have never attained to the gravity which dwells in the eyes of a baby of 3 months old. It is the gravity of astonishment at the universe. And astonishment at the universe is not mysticism, but a transcendent common sense. The fascination of children lies in this, that with each of them, all things are remade, and the universe is put again upon its trial. As we walk the streets and see below us those delightful bulbous heads, 3 times too big for the body, which mark these human mushrooms, we ought always to remember that within every one of these heads there is a new universe, as new as it was on the 7th day of creation. In each of those orbs there is a new system of stars, new grass, new cities, a new sea. And that is basically the, like, I would say that is basically the thesis of everything Chesterton ever wrote.
Right.
But I also think it's just and as such, I should say, I think it's just really marvelous that this is a big thing for him, is recognizing that the world is actually full of wonders, and that the cruelty of what we call, like, you know, being contemporary or being reasonable or like just being real or just wanting to be
gritty,
rational, just wanting to be gritty, is that we think that it has to be bad, you know, that the real thing has to be bad and boring and blasé, and that just because I'm bored with the world, that like the world is boring, you know, where he's constantly emphasizing that, like, if you are bored with the world, it's because you have a grave spiritual malaise, that the world is in fact full of wonder, and that the truest and the most genuine thing about the human experience is to see and adore the fact that it is full of wonder. With it, he also has this kind of sub-theme about things being made new by being rediscovered again. He has this wonderful novel called Man Alive, in which the main character, or one of the main characters, sort of like shows up in a place and he takes this job and he's working for this job, and then this like woman walks by the street and he like drops his job and he like pulls out a guitar and he starts singing to her and he like woos her and they like run away into the distance, and you think like, what the heck was this? And then you realize like they've been married for like 30 years and this is just what they do.
Wow.
It's like they keep doing keeps doing this. He keeps like sweeping her off her feet and like grabbing her like off the street or all of these things and like wooing her afresh, and like this is their life, you know, is that it's new every moment. And he's right about all of this, of course, but he's particularly right about the way in which like looking at a baby forces you to see it, you know, or nothing forces you, but it's a profound invitation to see it. That like,
right,
that this child, this human being, this immortal soul, is actually like inventing the world afresh, insofar as and seeing the world afresh, literally as new as it was on the 7th day of creation, because he, in your case, your baby, he has literally been newly created, you know? I mean, like he is newly created, and so he sees things with newly created eyes. And that like that's actually glorious. It's interesting, like thinking of that as a reflection on what you were saying with Mary Cassatt and what we were kind of grasping towards about what we both find so beautiful about her. That Chesterton in his own medium is, I think, pointing towards something really similar.
Yeah, well, and this is something, I mean, as you're speaking, it's bringing me back to my wedding day, which you officiated, and you delivered what still the most beautiful homily, frankly, I've ever heard, and which most of the people in attendance said was the most beautiful homily they'd ever heard. Not to blow smoke up your ass, but it was, and has become both representative to me of what I think is true, good, and beautiful about your spirituality, and has become pretty instrumental in mine. And you were preaching. You did this beautiful. So I met my wife, my now wife, when I had just recently broken my shoulder, and we met over a donut. And you did this beautiful job, in a way that if anyone's familiar with musical theater at all, we'll remind them kind of Hades Town and the way that musical is structured, of connecting the Adam and Eve story to our experience and how we met, and his missing rib and my broken shoulder, and the apple and the donut and all these kinds of things. And you did this beautiful job talking about how Christ makes all things new, and there is this attitude of, let's tell the story again. Let's tell the story again. Let's go back and find something new in the story. And that seems really richly paralleling with what you're saying right now, that the Christ child, as it were, through his eyes, makes all things new over and over again. And we sort of have that moment of, tell the story again. Let's look and see it again. Let's tell it anew and find something out different this time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Read anybody who's read Chesterton will have like a major decoder ring into like a great deal about how I approach the world and like things that I bring to homilies and things. Because he's always sort of running around in the background. Actually, Chesterton was like 500 pounds. He didn't really run anywhere. But
if you've never seen Chesterton, and we probably can't put a photo of him in the video version of this podcast because, of course, copyright claiming. But he basically is. If you've ever seen a picture of the cartoon character Nigel Thornberry, imagine if Nigel Thornberry ate Nigel Thornberry, and you'll have a pretty good idea of G.K. Chesterton.
It's pretty much right. One of my other favorite authors, P.G. Wodehouse, uses as a frequent, who's a great novelist, he uses as a frequent analogy for something being very loud. He says, it's like G.K. Chesterton falling on a tin roof.
Oh, God. It's so mean because he actually had like a lot of problems with self-hatred and body dysmorphia and stuff. And so
I had no idea, because he seemed like, I thought he was like, I had no idea.
He came into peace later with it, but he has like a lot of like little letters that he wrote to himself about like the man he was beneath all of the man people could see. And like,
that's really sad.
Drawing ugly pictures of himself and just very emo. And I mean, it's beautiful to see that someone, who's that insightful and mystical can still struggle with mental health the way all of us do.
Yeah.
He is a character. He is a hell of a character. I mean, you got to just love sort of the. Yeah, I mean, he feels like a children's drawing. He just is that guy.
He just is that exactly. And it's funny you should mention that with the Christ Child, because I think it's in series his very famous book Orthodoxy. That's a sort of and it is a strong, hilarious, and beautifully conceived argument for why belief in Jesus Christ is the most human possible response to the inhumanity of modernity. And so, which is very beautiful because he's writing in this age when everyone wants to be like, kind of like, believe in science, quote unquote, and all this kind of stuff. And I think
to quote Nacho Libre, which we still did an episode on, I don't believe in God, I believe in science.
I believe in science. Yeah, exactly.
I hate every orphan that ever lived.
Yes, exactly.
That's gritty.
That's gritty. Yeah. So he has this beautiful passage in it where he talks about, because again, he wants to really emphasize the way in which like we get tired of things by repetition, not because the thing is any less marvelous than it was before, but just because we lose the ability to attend to it, And so his example is like, but think about a little child who is constantly able to ask you like again, to the point that like the parent inevitably like wants to go insane, but he's this incredible image where he talks about like, he's like, the sunset doesn't cease to be marvelous just because it happens every day, and the sunrise doesn't cease to be splendid just because it happens every day. He says, in fact, maybe it's actually just that the sunrise is followed by the sunset is followed by the sunrise, because every day Christ looks at it and says, again.
Yeah.
I think that's marvelous. I think that's
I
really
actually
marvelous.
I actually love that piece by him. I quote it to people all the time. I really, really like it. I want to pause really quickly if we can. I joked that we were sponsored by your Masterpiece board game before, but I do want to actually give a shout out to our real sponsor.
Real sponsor.
Real sponsor time, Catholic Creatives, the organization Catholic Creatives, and Catholic.store as well. So a little bit about them. Catholic Creatives, for its part, is dedicated to igniting what they refer to as kind of this new renaissance through prayer and beauty and the creative spirit. And to do this, they work to connect and support and promote different artists and innovators and makers and storytellers from kind of across the faith community. But it does take a community to bring ideas like this to life. So we'd encourage you to support our Patreon, the Patreon for this podcast. You not only, by doing so, help this podcast, but you contribute directly to future workshops and summits and resources meant to support Catholic artists around the country, while getting an inside track on these activities with access to our members-only Facebook group. And I do want to give a shout out to, just very off the cuff, the spirit of some of the Catholic Creatives events that I've been to. A lot of these kind of artsy fartsy classes and summits and things will tend to be anti-child, quite frankly. And, the number of babies just running around at Catholic Creative Summits and, loose breasts nursing a baby while someone is playing, violin concertos and doing interpretive dance. And it's just kind of everything you want in a super bohemian, deconstructionist, artistic event fueled by a Catholic imagination to be. I mean, it's really freaking fantastic in that regard, and super, super open to life and children and all that beauty there. So I can't speak highly enough about those things. And if you want to support them, please do go support our Patreon directly. And if you want to support us additionally, you can go to Catholic.store. And you can order some of the beautiful products made by Catholic artists from all over the world. And just those URLs again, we got catholiccreatives.org/support for the Patreon. And we have Catholic.store for the merch. And I mentioned that, or if you watched the video version, you saw that Morgan, when he was not fussy, was wearing little Catholic Creatives onesie, and we'll be hopefully selling those soon through our particular page on Catholic.store very, very soon, along with some other swag that I've been working on behind the scenes. So
thanks, swag.
Yeah, follow all of that over there, and just thank you in advance for your support, because we be but humble artists and we need patronage in order to buy bread for our cute babies. So thanks a bunch.
Jacob, I don't know how to tell you this, but you shouldn't be feeding Morgan bread yet.
It's sort of, it's one of those waterfall things like we were talking about in Angels, where I'm giving bread to my wife and she's, consuming the bread and the bread becomes the milk. I didn't want to do the whole Mufasa circle of life bullshit for you, but yeah. The antelope eat the grass. We eat the antelope. We become the grass.
We get trampled to death by antelope. You become traumatized for life, but you get over it pretty quickly when you hang out with a warthog who farts a lot.
Yeah. And who definitely is not Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Anyway, I want to take, actually, kind of speaking of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, weirdly.
Oh my.
I want to kind of take a darker turn, if that's okay.
Great.
I want to bring up some things that have also influenced my idea of babies in a much less obvious way, but an important way, because I wouldn't want to dip in too far into, I wouldn't want to over sentimentalize, I guess, this. Like, it is as beautiful as we're saying it is. Babies are as beautiful as we're saying they are. The existence and capacity for babies is as beautiful as we're saying it is. And yet, there is crying all night. And there is screaming, and there is rashes, and there is existential fear that you are screwing up on a profound level, and there's just so much poop. And again, in my psychotherapeutic process and practice, just going to that for reference, I talk to a lot of people who are really overwhelmed by that, because they've heard people like us talking about the sentimentality of parenthood, and they build it up. And they're kind of crushed by the weight of the reality. I want to take our listeners back in order to give an analogy for how I answer that, and not just to those people, but like within the struggles of my own heart, I want to take people back to one of my most important dates with my wife. It was the day I asked her to be my girlfriend. Aw. And we had met in early October. She's sitting here watching me say this. So now I'm like all self-conscious and weird because normally she's in the other room and now she's like watching me do this with Morgan and it's like cringe and embarrassing. But anyway, so we met in early October. So most of our dates, because I'm me, were very Halloween themed. You know, and just all our subsequent dates were themed to the appropriate time of year. And the date I asked her to be my girlfriend was sort of set up to be like classic horror movie date. And there's this thing that the National Theatre does in London, and they do these both live broadcasts and rebroadcasts of live events, of like these major theatrical events for very limited runs, like 1 or 2 shows, and then it's over in movie theaters. And you can see like big operas that you would never get the chance to see, and you can see amazing theatrical events that are now over. Every once in a while, if you kind of watch the National Theatre Live's social media accounts, and I recommend it because they do some really cool events. And I found out that one of the movie theaters, one of like the more artsy kind of indie movie theaters, the sort of hipstery ones that sell weird popcorn, was showing Benedict Cumberbatch's Frankenstein.
That's a thing. I didn't know that existed.
You should, because this like... I had a friend, this is a sidebar to a sidebar. I had a friend when I was a kid who like one day came into class. I was taking a theater class and he walked into class and he was wearing a Bruce Springsteen hat and a Bruce Springsteen t-shirt and Bruce Springsteen patches on his jeans and a Bruce Springsteen like handkerchief or bandana or whatever in his back pocket and Bruce Springsteen socks. And we're like, hey man, how's it going? And he was like, I saw a Bruce Springsteen concert last night. And we're like, yeah, we kind of guessed.
That was hard to figure out. Yeah.
How was that? And he goes, man, I had heard music before, but I had never heard music.
Oh my gosh.
Which is like a lot. But to connect this back, I had seen plays before. I don't know if I'd ever seen plays like Benedict Cumberbatch's Frankenstein. Because he and another actor whose name escapes me, but who ironically ends up, because this was performed before either of them were in their respective Sherlock shows, the other actor ends up doing the American version of the show Sherlock.
Oh, funny.
On CBS. Like, so they both end up going on to do Sherlock Holmes things within a couple of years of this performance. But it is this insane production, very minimalistic, where they swap nights, where one will play the scientist and one will play the monster. And their respective performances, I got to see the version where Benedict Cumberbatch is the monster. And they don't they don't tell it from the scientist's perspective at all. They tell it from the monster's perspective. And so the play begins with this very extended, easily 20-minute long silent period of a nearly naked Benedict Cumberbatch covered in scars and stitches climbs out of this sort of grotesque womb and proceeds to, on stage in front of us, learn how to take steps for the first time and learn what his tongue is and like feel things out. And there's nobody else on stage and he's just kind of exploring the space and exploring his own body. And it is this macabre parody of a baby. And we see him then as he's rejected by the world, and we see as he's faced by cruelty. And we see the full monstrousness of what a baby can be. And as his own father in the character of Victor Frankenstein rejects him and ultimately falls to him in the classic sort of biblical tradition of son killing father and replacing him. And I was so moved by the performance because it wasn't the whole "it's alive" sort of lightning and thunder and steampunkery that I'm used to. It was just this really raw, tender look at this creature who is so disturbing and ugly, but is so innocent and beautiful if you have the right lens to see it. Staggering around the stage. And I ended up, as I am wont to do, going down like kind of a research hole of how they prepared for these roles. And they did two things. They watched tons of home videos of babies taking first steps and doing things. And they hung out at VA hospitals.
Oh, wow. Sure.
To watch men who'd lost limbs or lost senses or lost parts of their brain try to put shit back together.
Right. Oh, wow.
And you can so tell both of these things are in this performance, where there is the innocence of the baby and there is the horror of the violence of, I know how this thing in front of me, this arm or this hand in front of me should work, but I don't even know what to call it. And I don't know how to make it do that thing.
Right.
And that's just the blind terror that those who have suffered accidents like that, be it for our country or just through misfortune, have gone through, fueling this performance. And it gave me this really profound sense that, and this is, I know, such a long-winded way to get to this, but it gave me this really profound sense that to cope with the horror and the ugliness of babies, which is there, we have to understand that even as we are experiencing it, and even as they are experiencing like the beauty and the newness of everything and all that wonder stuff we were talking about is totally there, they are also experiencing the horror of their own existence anew, and they are looking at their hand and they want it to touch the itch on their face, and it won't. And you can kind of pace this as kids get older, like just on a very sort of stages of development and Piaget and all these kinds of things, like the terrible twos and all this is when a kid is starting to gain some level of consciousness and he knows what the words are and he can hear what everybody's saying and he can't make his mouth say the same words. And he tantrums and he gets angry really, really quickly. And we all, as adults with the privilege of adulthood, with the privilege of Victor Frankenstein, go, oh, this piece of crap baby is screaming. And why does he get so angry so easily? And we can even go into our own child selves. We'd be like, oh, I'm judged. He thinks I'm a bad parent and I'm mad now. I'm going to go retreat into my like baby self and throw my own little tantrum and yell and scream and do all kinds of parental things that I'm ashamed of later that only feed the cycle of guilt and all this shit that I see day in and day out in the therapy office. But what it comes down to is, insofar as that baby is experiencing all the wonder for the first time, that baby is experiencing all the horror for the first time of themselves and of existence. And there can be beauty in that. I'm not saying that that's brutal and without meaning and without beauty. But I guess my biggest influence in parenting and in my idea of babies is how can I empathize with my child how can I rejoice with my child as they see the new things? And how can I even ride the wake of their spiritual and experiential boat, experiencing things anew myself? But also, how can I step out of my own anguish when they're crying at 3, 4, 5 a.m. and step into empathy for the fact that however much this is existentially freaking me out, it is existentially freaking them out a billion times more.
Right.
And I think that, I don't know, that's my personal answer to the rift between sort of cupcake mommies and bad moms or you know, quirky dads and bad dads or whatever you want to call these groups. Right. And again, I'm not calling them bad. This is just like the Facebook name they've given themselves sometimes. It is just like, there is beauty in the suffering if you can bring empathy to it. And there is beauty in the newness. It's not annoying when the kid says over and over and over again, do it again, do it again, do it again. You can bring beauty to the newness too if you bring empathy and just empathy for the weirdness of the experience of being this freakish creature with, as G.K. Chesterton says, like the bulbous head, and equal parts beautiful and wondrous and enchanting and also grotesque and terrifying. I don't know. I think that's the point of this.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. I think it's really helpful to think of it that way. Augustine has some passages about babies in the Confessions that I think like sort of freak people out at the contemporary moment a fair amount. Because he just basically talks about this. He talks about like, yeah, the way that, you know, like a baby's limbs sort of like punch and flail and stuff, and that they can't they're not actually under their rational control. They can't actually make them do the things that they want to do. As the brain develops, they begin to have a certain sense of the things that they desire them to do, but that doesn't keep pace with their ability to do it, as you were saying. And he just says, like, he's like, yeah, we just have to come to, like, what does this mean? He's just thinking about this really seriously, and he just wants to understand, what does this mean? Of course, he was a dad, right? I mean, he had a son, whom he loved extremely dearly. So he would be reflecting on this from his own experience, both of seeing children around, but then also of being a father himself and seeing his own son. These things end up being for him actually examples of, avenues in to understanding what we will come to call like original sin, the effects of sin, which we mean like sort of like why is it like this? Like, why doesn't everything kind of work right away? Why doesn't the mind and the body, like why doesn't the whole person develop at the same time in the same way? And like why don't you just kind of grow smoothly into your own whole existence,
well, and from a psychological perspective, why does it bother us that that's the case?
And then why does it bother us and all of this? Yeah. And in the end, he just says like, yeah, well, we in looking at all of this wonder and looking at all of this beauty, we do also see like really up close with our own eyes, in someone who has not yet learned to hide it, the ways in which the human being who is made good does not come to us as perfect, right? Made good, but as we come to ourselves, as we're given to ourselves and given to the world, in our actual experience, also broken, right? I mean, there's this idea about being affected by the kind of crisis or trauma of the first sin, and then the legacy that it creates, and that like we don't just mean by that that like, oh, people learn to do bad things by like watching bad things be done. No, we mean it at this much deeper level, that like that as a parent you have this task of accompanying your child, learning to use his body, like learning to understand, and then as you say, like it's actually a high kind of like moral and human calling to like empathize and reach out in love, rather than just to be like frustrated or disgusted or like annoyed that this isn't all just like the smooth perfection that we want it to be. And something in that I think is actually really beautiful. Like there is a kind of like echo of Eden. Like there's a certain longing for Eden, like that we see this new baby, and there's something about the heart that says like, this baby should be for me, should come to the world not only good, but also like perfect. Right. And there's a real longing for Eden there that I think is actually totally beautiful and should be praised, but shouldn't be hypertrophied, like, because we have that longing because that's what our heart was made for. And then I can't be attached to it. I have to let it go, and like actually learn to love this child as he is in front of me and or she is in front of me,
Well, maybe you disagree with me, but I would say not let it go, but kind of use it as a foothold to climb higher than it, if that makes sense. Because I do talk to a lot of parents who think they have to let go of that existential dread or anxiety or despair or anger or whatever it happens to be for them, whatever kind of unique mask it puts on for them. They think they have to let go of that in order to be good parents, in order to be there for their kid. And their struggle to defeat that actually starts them in a shame cycle where they actually can't climb out of it even more. And my whole point is like, no. It's the exact opposite. This is incarnational, right? This is Christ becoming man and joining us to give our suffering meaning. This is what you're doing for your kid right now. You are uncomfortable with how they're screaming. You are uncomfortable with the poop. You are uncomfortable with the pain. You are uncomfortable with the ugliness. But they are too. So use yours to bond with them and empathize. And yeah, they can't understand you, but they can pick up on your biochemistry. So I will sit there with my baby and he's screaming and crying. This happened last night. And I'm saying, I know, I'm upset too, buddy. I know, I get it. I'm upset too. We'll get through it together. And he doesn't understand me, but I understand. And it brings down my biochemistry and my emotional temperature, and that he does understand. He bonds with it. And so like I start cementing that language for myself as part of my own psyche, and it grows up with him. And he learns that, hey, it's okay to suffer as long as we're just bonding in the suffering. And hey, it's okay to discover and enjoy new things and nerd out about them, and it's not cringe to like things, again, as long as we bond over them. And everything ends up coming back to empathy. If I start offering my suffering and my joy now, and my annoyance and my existential dread now as sort of this living offering of empathy.
That's great. Yeah, that's really beautiful. I think that's really right. I think no, and I think you're right to point that out. Like the only thing that to let go there is to let go of this imagined vision that like I can live in Eden now, that I can live with a perfect baby and be a perfect dad or a perfect mom, and that I won't have to watch my child suffer, or that I won't have to like suffer because of the things that they can and can't do. And then to just say like, so I'm going to let go of this imaginary world, a way in which the human being was once first made for, so it was reasonable that we long for it. But like, I have to learn to live in like my actual reality, which in fact is this like really beautiful process of growing and becoming alive that you point out. That's awesome. I think that's really, really great.
Speaking of that reality, I mean, I'm hoping my dynamic mic is enough that this didn't happen, but there's a very good chance that everybody just heard my son let out a cannon fart just across this room.
Oh man, I didn't hear it. That sucks.
Did you not hear it?
No.
Oh yeah, it was honestly, it's disturbing how loud they are sometimes. He has the farts and sentimentality and just general disposition of a 50-year-old man. But I would also say, just as far as, because you really wanted to take this through the arts that have influenced us, right? Like this is so important to the artistic process, right? Because if you get into the arts thinking it's all going to be, oh, it's just so beautiful, and I'm going to create all this amazing, beautiful stuff.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Disaster.
Like you're going to burn out in about 8 seconds. But then the alternative is, if you don't acknowledge the beauty of that constantly, and if you're not willing to experience all things as new that way, you end up going into kind of the tortured artist thing that we did the whole episode on, where the suffering becomes the point. And so, whatever it is you're creating, whether it's that painting or that dance or that, short film or that child, I really do think that this learning to experience all things as new and beautiful and exciting on the one hand, and learning to use my suffering to give me insight and bonding capacity for another person on the other hand, is like maybe the most important part of the artistic practice, and by extension the most important part of the parenting practice, and only by extension, right? That it is actually the artistic process that gives us this platform for understanding what parenting should be, and vice versa. It is only through understanding parenting that we can actually have a healthy experience with our own artistic craft. Maybe that's too hot like a take, but I don't know. That's where I'm at right now in my kind of sleep deprived new parent state.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think it makes sense. I dig it. I think that's awesome. Can I offer you this like very frivolous, but like I just really want to talk about this this German novel I just read.
I would love if you talked to me about this German novel you just read.
Okay, so I just read this German novel called Kleiner Mann, was nun, which is like what now, little man? Yeah, it's about like a poor couple in the interwar period in Germany. So like inflation is out of control and like it's hard to get a job and all that kind of stuff. And anyway, so they meet randomly, like have sex on the beach. And then she gets pregnant from that, and they eventually have form a relationship, and then they get married, and then the novel is about them it's like a young married couple and stuff. And it's actually really charming. It verges a little bit on the sentimental sometimes, but the novel is really good. It's by a guy named Hans Fallada, and
Wait, Hans Falala?
Falada.
Like the Christmas song?
Yeah, Falalala. No, with a D at the end. But yes.
My
yes,
name's
almost.
Hans Falala.
Hans
And
Falalala.
I am the king of Christmas Town.
This is not a very fun Christmas town, but he is king of it. So listen, so like a lot of the
German after all.
Yeah, well, it's true. So a lot of the drama of this book is that like, they're poor and I think he's like a soft communist or socialist or something. And so he's like, whatever. I mean, if you were living in the 30s and in Germany, it would be pretty hard not to be a communist, to be honest. Because if your alternative is like being a Nazi or like you're just not having political opinions, like what are you going to do? But anyway, so a lot of the drama in the novel is about like the constant bright light in the novel is like this baby that they have. They have a little boy, which is really cute. And like, they're just always talking about their baby and all this kind of stuff. But like, I don't know if this is a real glimpse into like what child rearing was like in the like late 20s and early 30s in Germany. But, people talk about like attachment parenting, where like I want to sort of like address your needs and I'm going to be attentive to you and, all this kind of stuff. And then the other people will talk about like, they have these different methods for like trying to get their baby to sleep through the night, like ferberizing their baby and these kinds of things. Okay, fine. That involves like letting them cry for a while, etc. How parenting is proposed in this book is that the mother says that this is what the nurse told her at the hospital. They like get the baby home, they're ecstatic, and they have a baby. This is all crazy, and they set the baby down, and the baby, of course, immediately he starts crying, and the husband goes to like pick up the baby, and the wife goes, stop. I'm like, what? She says, we just have to let him cry. He's like, what? He said, this is how the world is.
Oh, God.
This is how the world is. And he just has to learn to deal with it. Otherwise, we're just teaching him something that isn't true. And so for the rest of the novel, like whenever the baby shows up, the baby, they'll just make these like kind of casual references to the baby, just like, so like when they first get the baby home, he'll just scream for like 8 hours a night and they just won't touch him.
Oh, Jesus.
They just won't touch him because he has a schedule and they'll only touch him like on the schedule and all these things. And it's just like, oh my gosh. And so this all culminates in eventually the baby learns to, shock of all shocks, comfort himself because his parents won't touch him. And at least not at night. And so there's this incredible scene in the novel where because they're very poor, but they make friends with a guy who's very wealthy. It turns out that he's probably running a prostitution ring, but anyway, he likes them and he's very nice to them.
I'm liking this. I started really good with the whole Sex on the Beach thing, and like between the parenting advice you're positing and the whole sex ring thing, I'm liking this novel less and less.
It's difficult. I know. When you're into German novels, you just got to be in for a penny, in for a pound, okay?
Because they are gritty.
They are gritty. Yeah, exactly. And so at one point, so this like rich guy is like, well, I'm going to treat you. I'm going to like take you out of the night on the town. They're like, oh, this is really great. So he like takes him to this night on the town. But they're like, what are we going to do about our baby? Gentle listener, they just leave the baby alone.
Oh, fuck.
All night. And like, you could tell that like, I am a 21st century man because like that scene is kind of long. It's probably like 30 or 40 pages in the novel. Like every page, I'm like freaking out. I'm like, but what about the baby? But you gotta call and send her to the baby. But what's the baby doing? And like, how is the baby? Like, oh my gosh! Like, I am having a panic attack just like listening to this novel about like
imagine.
leaving
I'm having
your
a panic
baby.
attack listening to you listening to this novel.
That's it. I just wanted to say, like,
screw you, dude.
I offer you this. I offer you this as like the weirdest glimpse into like what a baby is like and how to have a baby that I've ever seen.
Well, it is. I will say, I mean, it's really interesting. And see, now I'm sensitive because I don't want want this to be primarily an arts podcast, not a psych one. And I don't want to like kind of go outside my lane and start giving parenting advice here, because the appropriate venue for that is the therapy office. But I will say there's some very compelling theories that a lot of, and I don't think they're crazy at all because of the brain science that they've put out with things like, if you guys are interested, there's a book called The Science of Parenting that's really fantastic and looks at like brain scans of newborn children and different parenting styles and things. And there's some really compelling theories that a lot of the horrors that you mentioned with communism and Nazism that came out of Germany during that time were actually precisely because of what at that time were very newfangled parenting ideas. Then that these were actually very much trauma responses to being raised that way.
Shock.
And there's some really compelling studies that back up that idea. I mean, obviously it's a charming, weird German novel and you're going to get that kind of stuff, especially at that time period. But I do think I will say you say it's obvious that you're a 21st century man. I don't know that is obvious. It's obvious that you're not from the 20th century. But realistically, when most of these artists we're talking about, whether it's Cassatt or whether it's, Renoir or any, going way far back to Church Fathers, like when these people are walking around, they're not leaving their baby all night. In part because there's nowhere to go. You know what I mean? And I want to be clear that like, gosh, I'm saying like a lot in this episode tonight. You can tell I'm tired. I don't know. To me, and I'd be curious what you think of this, but the art, okay, if we're going to take the art form thing, it does require total commitment. Like any artist is going to tell you, I mean, you're an author for God's sake, right? You have to write every single day. And sure, have boundaries or whatever, but you have to write every single day. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to go off and not write, because then you're going to fall out of the habit. You're not going to ever write, and you have to paint every single day, and you have to, if you're going to do this, you've got to freaking do it. Or just don't do it. Like shit or get off the pot. But if you're going to do this, do it. And I do think that this sort of, oh, let's just leave the baby. Oh, let's just let the baby cry it out. Is so antithetical to the artistic experience, because it picks and chooses when I can jump in and out. I can play artist. I can play parent. I can pretend to be. I can go and tell all my friends that I'm a parent or an artist, but I'm not really. Right. If I'm doing that, I'm not really that thing. And there's no authenticity to that experience. And on top of that, I want to offer, and this is my own thing, maybe we're getting too far afield here. But this idea too of, oh, well, this is just the way the world works, right? Which is this very brutalist notion, that does appear. I mean, realistically, even though parents are much more bonded with their children prior to the 20th century and the Industrial Revolution, that idea does appear. I mean, as far back as any idea appears, let's adjust them to how brutal the world is right now. Right. I think that's where now we've come full circle on this episode, right? Because that's where the whole beauty and wonderment comes from. By being parents and by protecting our children from the grossness of the world, we don't actually just protect them. We actually contribute to the world being a little less terrible. We don't just stop, because you got to remember, you could lean back in a very non-Christian way. And let's be clear, like the sentiment of this nurse in the book is a deeply anti-Christian sentimentality, not anti like Christians as people, but Christianity as a philosophy and as a worldview, because we have a duty to change the world. And the primary way I do that is through loving and empathizing with my kid, making them a little bit less of an asshole so that the world isn't just that way. Right. And so rather than just letting, they got to get used to it sometime, better be right now when they just popped out the chute. It's like, how about we use this as an opportunity to make the world a little less terrible for them, and then they'll go out in the world and make it less terrible for everybody else, and we can maybe leave some of the terribleness behind. And that I think is why I will say this. I will go as far as to say this. I think that's why, in part, babies are the highest art form. Because your painting, I don't care how good it is not going to make the world a better place. It's not. It might inspire some people to go make the world a better place themselves at its best. That's the best you can hope for. But that canvas, that dance, that short film is just the product. It is not going to make the world a better place. Your baby, if you empathize with that baby and you really commit to it as your art form, is going to change the world. And rather than adjusting to how terrible the world is, it's going to make the world a little bit less terrible. And all the dreams of the artist in our Tortured Artist episode, right? We talked about, what's his name? God, I'm blanking on his name now. From the musical we were reviewing and just all these different artists who bought into this idea of like, oh, I'm going to be the best writer or the best painter and I'm going to change the world. No, idiot, you're not. You're not. But guess what? If you have a kid, you are. Like, for better or worse, you are actually going to change the world. So do it well. Do really commit and make it beautiful. I don't know. That's my rant. I've ranted a lot today. I feel kind of self-conscious about it, but I stand by what I've said.
No, that's awesome. I think as a father of some 2 weeks standing, talking about babies, you have every right in the world to rant, and I appreciate them. I appreciate your rants.
Well, thank you. And I don't know. I hope no one would ever feel indicted or condemned by anything that we would ever say in this podcast, because that's exactly the opposite of the point, right? The whole
except for singer-songwriter Shawn Mendes.
Screw you, dude. We got beef. I will see you at WrestleMania, brother. And also Gritty a little bit, because like
I have a lot of thoughts about Gritty.
Yeah, I'm sure. But anyway, the primary purpose, as I said right at the opening of this, is to inspire people to know that art is for them. And insofar as art is for you, babies are for you. And children are for you. And parenting is for you, to save you and to save them and to let you experience things anew in this bright and new and beautiful way, and to let your suffering and your existential dread and your midnight anxiety take on actual meaning and serve a purpose of bonding with somebody so that their suffering isn't as bad, and to make the world a better place. And there's just no cooler thing to create than a baby. So with that, after a very long-winded, weird conversation, I wish blessings on all of you. I hope you're all duly inspired, hopefully, from our ramblings. And I hope that you'll all go forth and create cool things.
You've been listening to Created Things, a podcast of Catholic creatives, hosted by Father Gabriel Toretta OP and Jacob Flores Popczak, produced by Jessica Flores Popczak and Kyle Meineke. To find out more about how you can support the podcast and other ventures for artists, visit catholiccreatives.org/support.